So I'm kind of changing gears here a little bit, and the reason why is because I do everything on the fly. Even having a list of notes for me, questions if you will, is a little bit outside my element. I do everything on the fly, and I just go with the flow, and I figure it out as I go. You know, Bobby and I did basically a 15-hour engine rebuild video on these engines, and I did it with no notes to give you an idea about that.
Oh, I can believe it.
So what I learned about Pete this morning so far is that he's more mechanically advanced and understands things more than the general Porsche owner, I think, because of his experiences not only with this car but other things in the past. So I've sensed that, and I want to give him an opportunity to look at some of the other things about these IMS bearings and about my IMS solution that he hasn't seen before. So to let you guys understand the full scope of this, I had never met Pete personally until this morning. You know, none of this was planned other than he was going to be here at 9 o'clock this morning and we're going to shoot a video. He had no idea exactly what it was going to be, and really neither did I. So we've gone with the flow, and I think people will appreciate that. So before I start putting some things in your hands, there's one question I want to ask you, and that is this. You know, in my position, there's certain things that just blow me away that people don't understand about mechanical things today. And I think it's because the world's become electronic, everything's about a key strike, you know, instant gratification, there's all unicorns and rainbows, nothing ever blows up, nothing ever fails, and this car is expected to be perfect. And because of that, there is a certain persuasion, if you will, of people that believe that the failure of this bearing, and moreover, the proactive or elective retrofit of this bearing before the engine fails, is basically hype and totally unnecessary. Okay? They believe that you can just keep the oil changed, that this is not really a problem, and if you look for metal debris while you're changing your oil, that you'll be able to curb this from happening. Okay? So based on your experience, what do you think about this failure and people that feel that you should not go ahead and proactively replace this before it leads to this? What do you think about that, and what would you say to somebody that was contemplating that proactive retrofit about this being hype?
Well, I think the evidence is right here for me, that basically if you take a position that you're just going to change the oil, that you're sort of betting that all the things that are out there about the IMS bearing failure are not right. But this is evidence that if you have a seal bearing, if you know anything about engines at all, and you have a seal bearing anywhere, then eventually that bearing is going to be a problem. And it's absolutely amazing to me that that small part could be the reason that this investment, $92,000, $3,000 investment in just a matter of seconds, is the whole car's gone. It is, the car basically is the engine.
Well, the car is, I was in a class in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I had a guy in the class who was an aviation engine builder. And he said, I'm here because I want to learn how to fix these cars, because he was a Porsche guy. He's like, I build aircraft engines. And he says, you know, when this happens, this car is bankrupt. There's no difference between this car having this failure and becoming bankrupt from that versus going out here and hitting a 10-point buck on the, on the road and totaling the car. There's no difference in that.
Yeah, this is, if I had had any idea about the potential for the bearing failure that I would have dealt with this, I would have paid the money, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to replace the bearing, and then the car would still be fine.
But you didn't know about anything about the IMS bearing.
Had absolutely no contact with anybody. Nobody, the manufacturer didn't contact me, the dealer didn't contact me, and because I was not a member of the Porsche Club, if I'd been a member of the Porsche Club and had the magazine, I would have read about it. But I didn't. I just didn't do that. Didn't have
Well, see, even there, it's been hit or miss in magazines and things like that, because this is clearly a very hot topic. And to let you know a little bit about how I got involved in this, a fellow icon person in the Porsche world, Bruce Anderson, okay? He wrote for Excellence Magazine. He was a technical writer for PCA for many, many, many years. He wrote books about air-cooled Porsche engines. To a guy like me, Mr. Anderson was the pinnacle, and he was the real deal. He didn't just sit around and write books and go get a manicure on Fridays. He was a mechanic. The guy understood how to build stuff. He was also a fellow Marine. And he came to Charles Navarro at Ellen Engineering and I, after the Porsche Literature Meet out in LA a few years ago, many years ago now, and he was writing for Excellence. And he said, look, guys, and you have to understand, at the time, I was air-cooled only. Okay, to me, a Porsche didn't have a radiator. And maybe today that's still one reason why air-cooled Volkswagens are what I really love. But he came to Charles and I and he said, look, he's like, these water-cooled engines have a problem, and they have a major problem. And he said, you guys are young enough and you're spirited enough, you have the mechanical and technical capability, you have the enthusiasm, you have the understanding. And he said, most importantly, I'm telling you this because you're very honest and trustworthy. He said, you need to start working on these engines. Because he was writing for Excellence, he was writing for these publications, he was getting letters about this, he was hearing major complaints about this, but he could not publicize those things because these cars at the time were brand new. And this was still under warranty and all that sort of thing. So, you know, he had publishers and editors to please, and everybody has to please somebody. And at the same time, he didn't just want to go out and spill the beans and make this thing blow up and be like a 60 Minutes thing. You know, 60 Minutes said that three-wheelers killed kids, and because of that we don't have three-wheelers anymore. I've got 4 of them, right? But at the end of the day, he didn't want to be like that. But he came to Charles and I in confidence, and he said, look, do this. At that time, I had never had, and I will repeat, never had a water-cooled Porsche on my property. Air-cooled only, okay? And I was hardcore. I thought Porsche stopped building cars in 1998, right? And I came straight home, and I bought a Boxster immediately. And then I went to a junkyard and I got every engine they had and I started taking them apart. And I had no idea what I was doing. But at the time, neither did anybody else. So Bruce gave us that insight and he told us to go do what we did. And at that point in time, what you have to understand was that the hype wasn't about, do I retrofit the bearing or not, right? Because that wasn't an option. Because the factory didn't give us the tools to do this. They didn't give us the procedure to do this. They didn't give us a bearing with a part number that could be changed to do this. You could buy an intermediate shaft bearing if you bought the shaft. Okay? But the idea behind this was what we were doing and what we started doing was black art. Because we were changing these bearings. I came up with the tools to pull them out of the engine with the engine together. The engine's still in the car, okay? I used a piece of a Porsche 914 air conditioning bracket, okay? Not many 914s had AC, but they had this long hexagon bolt. I used that, rethreaded the thing, welded some stuff onto it, and I made a puller that supported the back of the bearing, and I pulled it out. You know where I learned that? With my grandfather, who was a moonshiner, never had a job in his life, but I learned that working with him, pulling a bearing out of a Farmall tractor mower when I was probably 12 years old, okay? But that's where it all flashed back to that, and I pulled the bearing out, right? So once the bearing's pulled out, then we start coming up with ways to perfect that procedure so we could teach other people how to do it that didn't have a mechanical aptitude. Even though they worked at shops sometimes, they're technicians, not mechanics. So we came up with that, and then we came up with the products to do the procedure, and then I came up with ultimately the plain bearing IMS solution that I'll show you here in a minute that you've never seen before. But that sets the stage for what we did with all of those things. But at the same time, the hype back then was that you could change the bearing. So this thing's gone full circle from guys saying, oh, you don't really need to, this is hype that the bearing needs to be changed. I remember going back to the black art days when we were doing what nobody knew we were doing, and everybody's persuasion was that this bearing can't be changed. It can't be taken out of the engine. It can't be replaced, because they were told that by the manufacturer and by dealers and service writers. So I remember it from the days of, you can't do that, that can't be done, to the days of, well, now today it can be done, but no, you don't need to do that, and that's hype. So that's what drives me, is like, look how full circle that's been. Now yours, and this is what gets me about your car, again, at 29,000 miles, had you driven that car enough and had that bearing failed, it would have been under the mileage point for the car, and it would have been taken care of if it happened within that mileage point and within that time allowance, right? So a lot of the cars that don't get driven are held in high regards by people that are buyers, but those cars should be suspect more than being held in high regard.
Porsche has that problem more than probably anybody, because people have a tendency to baby them and not to put a lot of miles on them. So if you're buying, a lot of people think of a Porsche, I mean, I was thinking I've had that car forever almost.
Yeah.
But it's, that, you know, a lot, I mean, we've got a couple of cars now that are really old with low miles.
And I think one reason why we're so busy here, one is because I refuse to hire a bunch of people that don't know what the hell they're doing. And you know, my newest engine builder has been here for 14 years at this point. But I think one reason why we are so busy is because the rest of this car is really, really good, okay? So in the time that you owned the car, this will be something interesting for everybody. How many times was this car repaired?
I can't think of one repair on this car. That was the really hard part. Not a single mechanical problem on that car.
Exactly.
Not
and
one.
That's, you know, the brakes are excellent, the gearbox is excellent, the wiring is excellent, unless a rodent gets a hold of it, because it has soy-based wiring in it and the rodents love it. And that's a problem we have out here in the country sometimes. But, you know, they don't have issues. The car is freaking great. The car really is great. But that's why we're so busy, is because people understand that this is a car worth salvation. It's a car, like with this one here, I call this a resurrection. We're going to take this thing, we're going to make it our own way, and we're going to resurrect it and make it where it's going to be something that lives a really long time. And the engine at that point in time will be the strongest point of the car, and it won't be the weakest point of the car. And that's the problem with these, is that the engine was the weakest part of the car. But today, people have learned that the rest of the car is really damn good, and it's worth doing this.
Well, that car, I mean, the mechanics of the car, the gearbox was actually just getting to the point that it was loosening up a little bit with 29,000 miles. It was still very tight. I mean, the car stopped on a dime. I mean, it was an unbelievably good car to drive and fun to drive. And it's almost inconceivable to me that that little bearing in there, which lacked the ability to be lubricated, and that's the stress, that is the stress point in the engine where that bearing is. Well,
and the thing is, you know, you brought up lubrication, and I want to make it clear to everybody at home that lubrication is, of course, a factor with a sealed bearing, okay? And so with these engines, the bearings originally were sealed, and you know, that means it had a permanent grease, if you will, inside of it. And the problem is that the seal over time will shrink, and as that seal shrinks due to the heat and the exposure to engine oil and those sort of things, it lets oil by that seal, and that washes the grease out, or at least it dilutes the grease to the point where it doesn't do its job anymore. So in the earliest of days, while we were developing a lot of these fixes, my fix was to pop the IMS bearing flange off, okay, on the back of the engine, take a 90-degree pick and pick that seal off and throw it away, and open that bearing up to lubrication. But what we learned is the bearing like yours, the 6204 single row bearing, the weakest of all the bearings, the one that was the actual focus of that class action suit more than the other two bearings that were used during this generation. The issue with that one was that the bearing was too light duty. It was half the size. So with the earlier days, Porsche used a dual row bearing. It had 2 rows of 8 balls, 2 cages, twice as many components in it, so therefore it would basically carry twice the load. Later on, they went to the 6204, which I'm getting ready to put in your hand. That's what your car had, and it had 1 row of 8 balls. Now, one could argue why that was done. I have my reasons. I'm sure that people have their ideas about different things, okay? But the earliest bearings took many years before they started to fail. Those dual row bearings are just now starting to fail in higher numbers because the newest car that had a dual row bearing is now 20 years old, okay? So until 2 years ago, we didn't really see a lot of those dual rows failing. But the problem was that the ones we did see fail had more collateral damage. And the reason why is because it had 2 rows of 8 balls and it had twice as much wear debris. So as that bearing would take longer to degrade, the circulation of that metal in the oil was greater. The filter didn't pick it up, didn't pick all of it up, and it would circulate through everything else. So an engine like a 99 or a 2000 that had a dual row bearing would a lot of times have a massive amount more collateral damage. The bearings would be all scuffed up, the cylinders would be scuffed up because now that oil is metal laden because it has twice as much stuff as what you see in your blue tub here, and that would circulate through everything. But yours, being the 6204, that's where the load comes into it, because the load placed on the dual row versus a load placed on the single row was the same from the rest of the engine. They just made the bearing half as strong, okay?
Wouldn't that be the factor of the engines becoming more powerful, it would just consistently get worse?
Well, it could, but the thing is, obviously the load, the more rapid the acceleration and deceleration, the more shock loading that you have on those things. So, that could play into it a little bit, but the fact is that bearing was 1/2 the size of the original M96
No,
engine.
It was not in alignment with the engine and the power of the engine. They shouldn't have gone down. They should.
No, because the thing is that same bearing is used in a 97 Boxster, okay, or a 2000 Boxster with a dual row, or arguably a 2000. Some had single, some had dual, but they're the same diameter bearing. It's just 1/2 as wide, and I'll grab one of those to show you here in a second. But that's something that's interesting because you keep bringing up lubrication. And like I said, lubrication obviously does play into any bearing's failure, especially a sealed bearing. But I think with you and I, we start thinking about tractor implements and things like that. With sealed bearings, a lot of times it's a sealed bearing that sometimes has a Zerk fitting that you can grease, right? Or it's something like a wheel bearing that's on a tractor that's never going to see over 30 miles an hour. And I've got those on my Deutsch tractor, and they've been in there since 1982. You know what I mean? So now what I want to do is put a couple of things in your hands. Of course, this is an unfailed bearing, okay? This shaft actually failed. The actual shaft failed, okay? Because this is another thing that can happen. This is motive failure 24 of 31 that I've come up with. This shaft didn't have a bearing failure. This shaft had a failure of the shaft itself because the shaft is comprised of 4 pieces. 1 here, 2 being the tube, 3 being this sprocket, and 4 being this housing bore with integrated sprocket here. So this one, the bearing lived through this failure, but that's why I have this good one, right? It's another one of my pieces that I have here in my training facility. But grab that, look at it, that's your 6204 bearing, just like what failed in yours. Okay? And then we have, hand me that one back, we have the 6204 that I use in classes that I've just cut an opening in. That's supposed to be a full circle, but that's your single row of 8 balls.
Amazing.
Okay, so Pete, what you have there, that is that 6204 single row bearing, has 8 balls, an inner and outer race, and 1 cage. That was used from 02 up until 05 sometime in the '05 period, they started changing that bearing and moving to an even larger diameter bearing that was also a single row, but it has proven not to be very problematic at all. It's so big and it carries so much load. I've got one of those I'll put in your hands here after a while. Now this is the predecessor to that bearing, and this is the dual row bearing. So this one was used 97, starting in the Boxster, up through mid-year 2000. Okay, every now and then I'll see a weird 2001 that still has one of these in it, but this bearing is the same inside diameter, same outside diameter as that one. The only difference is it has two balls, two sets of rows of balls, basically, has two cages, has basically 4 races, okay, so inner and outer times 2. So this is what they had to begin with. They got rid of this and went to that. So I'm going to put this in your hands and see what you think about that. Now, in that class action suit, and again, this class action suit stuff was years ago. All that fact finding was like back in 2011 and 2012 in that time period, for the case being in like 2013 and the settlement being in 14. And people still today, I find, are referencing this settlement as like the be-all, end-all of the IMS problem, because they say that in that settlement, the dual row bearing had a less than 1% failure rate as settled by Porsche and agreed on by everybody, while the bearing that's there in your left hand, the single row, had an 8% failure rate, okay? While 8% is still a lot greater than less than 1, so, you know, people still are using this data today. Now, of course, obviously, you know, it's been years since that case, and we've got more mileage and more time in service on all the bearings, but it was still a much bigger problem back then than it is today. Now, I will say that a lot of people really put a lot of consideration in that class action lawsuit, because the amount of intermediate shaft bearings that were replaced in 2013 and 2014 from LN Engineering being the supplier of those was higher than at any other time, because I believe that case created instant validity for all the things that we've been saying for years at that point. And remember, I was saying that this is the day we were talking about before, where you weren't supposed to be able to change the bearing, right? Like what we were doing, people thought we were lying. The hype back then was that the bearing could be changed, right? So when the class action lawsuit came around, it was like, okay, well, not only can the bearing be changed, but it looks to me like the bearing should be changed, because now it has validity and credibility that there actually is a problem, because this magical, mythical lawsuit popped up. So people were buying this stuff left and right, and that's when the sales of all these bearings went through the roof. And about that time, right at that time, back in 2012, is when a little invention that I had been working on for many years, that we were actually granted the patent on, the patent was 8992089, if anybody wants to go look it up, called the IMS solution, came out, okay, in 2012. Now, that was something I originally invented with the sole intention of only putting into my engines that I built. I want to take care of what I've created. Some people say that's a fault. I think it's a great focus. So when I originally invented this, I only wanted to put this thing in an engine like this that I was building from scratch. My mentality at that point was, if you wanted the friggin' bearing I came up with, you'll buy the whole damn engine. That's the way that I looked at it. And then early 2012, a few copycats came on board. They were people who used to be customers of LN Engineering, who had bought parts and had bought a lot of those pieces and things that I had developed that I had never sold to them, but LN had. And we're two separate companies. We're not vested in each other at all. We co-develop things because I'm the guy behind the ideas and I have the capability to develop, and that's what I want to do. They're the manufacturing guys. I have the capability to sell, and that's what they want to do. So these copycats came on board. I instantly wanted to crush them. Instantly. because I knew what they were doing, and I knew they had been a purchaser of LN stuff. And then I start seeing them use bearings made in Romania and all this stuff. And I said, okay, I'm out of this thing. Here, LN, you can do what you want to with this IMS solution. I want them for my engines. That's all I care about, okay? That's how the IMS solution got out of my engines and got into the capability of being in other people's engines, or people retrofitting to it before they have a failure. And then, of course, you have all this hype stuff and all that pop up later. So to everybody at home, Pete completely didn't know any of this stuff. He hadn't researched this stuff, and that's why I'm explaining it to him. And again, none of this was planned. So now that you've held those two factory options, that little tub full of junk right there that went through the engine here, and this very light IMS bearing failure, would be doubled if that dual row bearing failed. Basically doubled. Not 100%, because some of those pieces are singular in there. But you would have twice as many balls, twice as much junk circulating through the engine. With this, we got two pieces. That's it. You're looking at the entirety of it. Okay? I'm not an engineer. I didn't go to school for engineering. Honestly, I was a graduate of White County High School in Cleveland, Georgia, and I barely made it through my senior year, and I was in special ed from the time I was in 3rd grade.
One of my guys.
Okay? But with that being said, even a guy like me can realize that the fewer amount of parts you have, the smarter something operates, and the less chances of collateral damage and these secondary and tertiary failures happening, right? So the way I look at it, a part that isn't there can't fail. The part that isn't there can't create debris that leads to other things failing. So that's why this is the IMS solution. Now, there's some of these copycat people, and I call them that because it pisses them off, quite honestly. But they have to make claims about this not working, but they've probably never touched one. But it's just like, it's to them, this is the arch rival because it's a competing product. I think this doesn't have a competitor because there's nothing else out there that works this simply. There's a plain bearing that doesn't have all that wear stuff in it. So it doesn't have a competitor as far as I'm concerned, but I don't care because I don't sell it. I build my engines with it, but I don't sell it. So what I'm getting at is when I came up with this, I came up with it not because I'm some crazy evil genius, because I'm not. I came up with it because I don't forget what I experience. And I've been working on air-cooled engines, Volkswagens and Porsches, since the age of 8. I built my first engine for a paying customer at the age of 13 for a 914. And I've been working on this air-cooled stuff for a long, long time. It truly is, and still is, my passion. So what you have here is an intermediate shaft. This is an intermediate shaft, missing one sprocket, by the way, because the sprocket actually failed. This is out of what some people consider to be the air-cooled Porsche to own. Basically the epitome of the air-cooled Porsche, the one that had all the years and decades of development go into it. This is out of the last generation air-cooled 993, okay? And the sprocket had a problem, and that's why it's not on here anymore. But what I want you to look at is this, okay? So this intermediate shaft stands for, the IMS acronym, if you will. A lot of people think that the shaft is the problem. Just the fact that the engine has this shaft is a problem. But the air-cooled Porsche proves that's not the case. Because going back to the 4-cam Carrera engine back in 1953, it also had an intermediate shaft. And Porsche has used an intermediate shaft like this one, almost exactly like this one, in every air-cooled 6-cylinder from the earliest 901 engine, which was for a very short period of time, leading up to the first 911 Metzger-based engine. All through all the air-cooled era, this intermediate shaft, pretty much in its exact dimension, was used, okay? And this is a plain bearing. This shaft was supported in the air-cooled Metzger engine by a plain bearing, okay? Now, like I said, I'm no evil genius. This is where I got my idea from, okay? It's a huge difference in the application because you got air-cooled versus water-cooled. You got a huge deviation in the way the engine's manufactured, everything about it. But you'll see that there's a striking resemblance between the wear diameter there, the outside diameter between this component and this one. It's actually exactly the same. Because I took what Porsche did for all these years and we just made this piece, basically, fit with a very specialized aluminum alloy that's made for carrying loads like this with oil being delivered to it. And that is how I came up with the IMS solution. So again, this is an intermediate shaft out of an air-cooled Metzger engine. This is the intermediate shaft out of an M96 or M97 engine, if you will, okay? So the major difference here, they both do the same job. They both basically drive the camshafts, is their job. They are driven via the crankshaft and they drive the camshafts. Same exact thing, but two much different ways to implement them into the engine. So for your information, that's how I came up with this. Because of prior experience and what makes sense. So once I had the idea, then we had to make this thing work. There was about 4 different major differences between these over the years. But the main thing was, once it went to manufacturing, it hasn't changed since then. But until that time, there was a lot of differences in the prototypes, the materials that were used. This black coating is a diamond-like carbon coating, okay? This is used on firearms. It's used in Formula One engines. It actually started in Formula One, and then it went to aerospace. But now they use it on high-end machine guns and things like that because it doesn't wear. So we use this coating to dramatically decrease the amount of startup wear that this flange would have, if you will, at startup. So the way it works is oil comes from a special engineered oil filter assembly that goes on the original oil filter housing, okay? It takes the place of the original filter. It has an oil line, it's a stainless steel Teflon line that runs into here. It provides this with just filtered engine oil right out of the oil filter, okay? Then that oil comes into the flange and then it comes out this little hole right here. That is what supports the intermediate shaft radially, meaning this direction, okay? Then there's a stud that's captive that goes down through here that I don't have here right now that holds this unit together, okay? And that is what basically allows oil to come out this hole here. So the stud is a retention factor, and this little hole right here is where oil comes out to control this longitudinally, okay? So we have about 12 thousandths of an inch of engineered infloat into this, okay? But that infloat is determined based upon oil pressure. So it's 12 thousandths static, but when you put oil pressure to this, now your intermediate shaft is gliding and is supported by that hydrodynamic film of oil, just like the main bearings in this engine, and moreover, just like this intermediate shaft bearing in the plain bearing Metzger engine in the air-cooled Porsche. No difference. Parts look a lot different, but it works exactly the same way, okay? Now in the air-cooled engine, this is all internal, and the pathways that feed oil into this are machined in the crankcase, which thereby adds cost and complexity to machining the crankcase. Mm-hmm. So when the factory went to that sealed bearing, the main thing they got away with was not having to provide an internal means of routing oil into this surface to support this intermediate shaft, both here and here. This is where it has both the support.
Yeah.
All right, so Pete, I've actually got that retention stud here that I was talking about that kind of goes together with that. And then there's a nut here that kind of holds it all together. I'm not going to bother putting that on there. But you can see that's what sets that static in thrust that we were talking about. So what I want to do now is I want to put this in your hand as you being a mechanical person, and I just want to see what you think about that compared to what you had.
Well, this is, it's amazing. It's absolutely, if I had any idea this was a possibility, that it wouldn't be sitting there right now. It's a no-brainer. I mean, it's just a no-brainer.
Well, and I think the difference there is education and knowledge and knowing what's out there, because there's two groups of people that own these cars. There's a group of people like you who I believe represent a gross number of the people that come to me with a failure. And there's another group of people out there that know about it, they've read about it, they understand it, they don't think it can happen to them, or they're just going to take their chances and sell the car cheap when it blows up. I have people tell me that all the time. Or they're going to wait till it breaks and then have me build the engine, which doesn't make any sense, because if you do that, you're going to spend thousands more in collateral damage components. But those are the two groups. You got the people that just don't know, and the people that do know and either think it's hype or they're not concerned with it. So you represent that first group, and guys, Pete represents the biggest group that drives my business at Flat Six Innovations. Remember, my business at Flat Six is not selling components. Matter of fact, we won't sell you a component. We don't have a component to sell to you. The least we're going to sell you is a complete engine like this. That's all we've got. That's all I want to do. So what drives that business is failure. Now, we get a fair number of people that do an elective build. Like, they know something's coming later, they've been educated, they want to fix all of it before something pops. But most people don't do that. So they say, oh, you just want to sell somebody a bearing. I don't sell a bearing, okay? I don't have a bearing to sell. But the only thing, the time my business benefits is when the worst case thing happens to you. And unfortunately, that is because of misinformation, or in your case, no information, or just not failing to do something because it's a problem. So I get that all the time. You just want to sell something. Actually, I'm tired of selling stuff. With the engines we build, we do not have the capability, nor do I ever want to have the capability, to even build 1% of the engines that were represented in these vehicles. So that's a big difference. So I hear it all the time. I didn't know about this. And the craziest thing to me is how people happen upon this. I can't tell you how many new owners of a car didn't do any research about that car at all, about any of the failure points. I don't think they even Googled it. They bought the car. They had wanted a Porsche forever. It was their dream car. And when they get it, the floor mats are worn. First thing they do is they go Google like Porsche parts. And all this stuff pops up, Porsche IMS bearing, Porsche engine failure, blah, blah, blah. And then they find me. Because they went looking for a pair of freaking floor mats for the car they just bought. I had that happen all the time. The floor mat story blows my mind.
But this is a no-brainer. I mean, this is, going back to the people I talked to about repairing the engine, they were going to do this. They were going to put another, I said, that's not, where's the guarantee? I don't even want the guarantee.
Well, now, something else that you don't know about is the first thing that came to market from LN Engineering was what we did with a ceramic retrofit of this bearing. So we worked with LN, and really my part of that whole process with these bearings, the later version of these, the ceramic hybrids, wasn't so much the bearing itself. I was working on that. That was my baby. That was my thing. And even though some of these other people out there that are copycats say they have a solution, that is the IMS solution. That is the name of that product, okay? So they're always robbing it. Oh, we have an IMS solution as a term of a solution. That is a product name. But long story short, my part of that ceramic hybrid bearing day was the development of the procedure to pull the bearing out of the engine while it was assembled and not let it jump time and all that, making those tools. That was my part of that. And we have some patents for those items as well and those different things. So in the earliest days, what went to market, while that was being perfected and while I was being basically told that I needed to sell it to other people, which I hadn't done at that point in time. It was only part of an engine if I offered it to somebody, was these ceramic bearings, or a ceramic version of this, where it has ceramic balls, had a higher quality race, inner and outer race, and it had a higher quality cage. It was a better mousetrap, if you will, but it was still a mousetrap. And those are still sold today. And for people that don't want to spend the $1,800 on that kit, they can go to the ceramic version of this, and it has basically a service interval. So a lot of those other providers you talked about, they may have been going to use one of the LN Engineering retrofit bearings that is just a better quality version of this. And while it does address any deficiencies from a materials aspect or a bearing being a cheaper aspect, it is not a design change like that. Today, that is the only thing that is a plain bearing for these engines.
See, that's a no-brainer for me because I don't want anybody touching my engine, the block. Once you start messing with that, even taking the heads off, to me that's.
Well, to me, if I'm doing that, I'm just going to pull the whole damn thing apart. You know, I mean, that's just me. Like, I can't tell you, I got an old Volkswagen over the other building now, and I'm like, yeah, it needs a spark plug rethreaded and some stuff like that. I know as soon as I pull that head off to fix it, I'm going to end up building the whole engine. I'm going to see something I don't like. My mind's going to start spinning. I'm going to be like, I'm going to put this thing back on. It's going to have another problem. So you know what? I'm going to pull it out and just build the whole thing to begin with.
Yeah. Well, you know, I told you I had a Nissan 300ZX Turbo. They had taken it in for service, and they called back and said, we're going to have to take the head off your engine. I said, what? I brought it in for a tune-up. And they said they had taken a spark plug out and a piece of plastic, tiny piece of plastic had fallen into the hole. And they put the spark plug back in and cranked it up. That caused enough of a displacement in the compression in the engine that they had to pull the head.
Classic. I just fixed an engine that I built in 2007 because somebody dropped a screw inside the intake manifold and it hit the piston, smashed the top ringland. When that happens, that is nothing more than that's a rookie mistake. I can't put it any other way. As soon as that spark plug comes out, you better put something else back in that hole immediately. And then, you know, if you're like me, you take a blowgun or a vacuum cleaner and you vacuum around that spark plug hole before you pull the plug out. Because there's something laying around there, you pull the plug out, it falls in.
When I fixed my bush hog with the bearings, I take the oil plugs out, I close them up so nothing can get in.
Yeah, it's just like an engine sitting over here behind you. Intake manifolds are covered with a Ziploc bag. Yeah. They have a zip tie around them, and they have a cap inside the intake. Yeah. Because I've worked around aircraft, and there's a certain thing called foreign object debris, and it makes things fall out of the sky. So anyway,
well, this if I had any idea that, you know, I would never have gone and let anybody just replace it. I'd cancel that out. If they're going to basically put the same thing in there that was there, even though it's improved, I still don't want you going in after 70,000 miles if I'm going to keep it.
Yeah.
It's just
it is half the cost or less of that. Yeah. It's an easier process to do because you don't have to do as much work when you're doing it. You don't have the oil filter adapter. You don't have any of that. So it is a little bit easier to do. And again, from a shop perspective, they've done this a lot, right? At this point in time, they've done this a lot. Now, years ago, we had to train everybody how to do it. This was a black art. I can't tell you how much of a black art it was pulling this stuff out and doing it.
Theoretically, they could have done that on that engine. That you could have done just that.
Yeah, pretty much. If you would have known there was a problem, if you would have just been at a car show, like Bobby and I go to Cars and Coffee in Athens here sometime, and there's a group of 996 guys that are there, and for the longest time I refused to drive a Porsche there because I didn't want the damn questions. I didn't want the questions. I didn't want to, because the thing is, I don't have a filter when it comes to this stuff, you know? And Bobby and I were there one day, guy started his car up. I was like, you hear that? Do you see that? Bobby's like, you gonna go talk to him? Nope. I ain't gonna tell him because it's gonna go down a rabbit hole that I don't wanna deal with, okay? So I drive military vehicles. And sometimes I wouldn't even go over and talk to those guys, not because I was being a jerk, but because I was there to enjoy myself and I didn't want to play 20 questions. But if you would have just went to an event like that, anywhere, and had your car,
Yeah.
somebody would walk up to you and be like, hey, you done your IMS yet? And you'd be like, what the hell's an IMS? And just that alone would have probably saved this engine, because that would have sent you going home, hitting Google, Porsche IMS failure. That would have led you to me, because you are in Georgia, definitely. We get these cars from all over the country. I got cars at my shop in Cleveland from 30 states, right? And I don't do car work here. I just do my own stuff here and research and training here. But you would have ended up finding out about us. I would have said, put this in the engine. You would have brought it to me. And I charge a lot of money for what I do with that. I'm going to charge more labor to do this than anybody else, because I'm going to pre-qualify that engine, because I want to make sure it doesn't have bore scoring, right? I want to look at all the bores. I want to make sure the rest of this engine is healthy. I want to do what I refer to as a pre-op on this thing. You know, if you're going to go in and have shoulder surgery, the day before, 2 days before, they're going to give you a MRI for other stuff, whatever. They're going to do a EKG on you. They're going to make sure your heart's able to take it. I do the same thing. And all the certified installers that I've trained to do this are mandated to do the same thing. So I charge more than anybody else, because we are in the business of building engines. I don't care if we do an IMS job. It doesn't matter to me. But if somebody wants the guy that invented this to do it, I'm going to charge them accordingly. And we're going to do a better job than anybody else has the capability of doing. But I'm going to charge you, $8,000 to put that thing in, because there's other things I'm going to do. I'm going to require that you do the coolant tank in the car. I'm going to require you do the water pump, the air oil separator, some corrugated tubing. There's other things in these engines now that are old. Guys, these cars got old, okay? And I'm not going to let that car leave my care and control unless I know that it was worth putting my invention in it. I don't want it to die on the table. The same way they don't want you to, your heart to stop during shoulder surgery. I don't want it to die on the table. And moreover, I don't want it to die later on. The worst case for me is a guy calls me up after I do this thing and says, well, my engine had bore scoring after that, or my engine had this after that. That's the worst call I can get. And I haven't had that call in over 10 years. It's going to happen. You do this stuff enough, you're going to blow things up, You take enough risk, you're going to have things happen. You fly enough airplanes, you're going to have something happen. You ride enough dirt bikes, you're going to have something happen. You shoot enough guns, you're going to have something happen. Build enough engines, you're going to have something happen. And every time I look at something like this and say, I haven't seen that before, this little reminder in the back of my head says, Jake, you finally did enough. So every time we haven't seen it before, it's because we finally did enough. Hello everybody, Jake Raby here. Now I'd like to welcome you to the RenVision Technical channel here on YouTube. And on this channel, you'll learn about all kinds of things. You'll learn about everything from Porsche engines to vintage Volkswagens, other stuff about vintage Volkswagens, not just the engines. You'll learn about things like this 1942 M2A1 half-track as an example. So once again, I want to thank you for viewing all the content here on RenVision. I want to invite you to spend more time with us. I want to bring you into my world. I want to help you understand a little bit more about what makes us tick, what we do, how we do it, and why. So certainly join us and let's have some fun together. I have to tell you guys, I've had all the 996s. I've had a turbo, I had 997s. I've had all that stuff, right? And I've had all my air-cooled Porsches. And today, the only air-cooled Porsche that I still have, the only Porsche that I have that I really still enjoy is my old 76 912E. Now, a 912E was basically mostly Volkswagen, half Volkswagen, if you will. It had a Porsche 914 engine in it, which was actually a Volkswagen engine that was using a Volkswagen van from 72 to 79, okay? So it's a bit of a bastard. It's a one-year-only car. It was the first 911 bodied car that I ever owned, and that car is the one that I want to keep. That's the one that you can't buy from me. It's number 985 out of 2099 that were built. It's one of 500 that had a sunroof and air conditioning and tinted windows. That was a weird thing back in 76. And a lot of people don't like those cars, but I love it because of what it is. And I love it because it has a Volkswagen engine in it. And I love it because most Porsche people look down on it. So people would ask me, Jake, why don't you just keep this car? Well, I might, but I don't think so. Right now, the current plan is to finish this engine, do all the things with it that I would do if you had brought me this car. If you were my customer, I'm going to do every single one of my checklists. It's going to follow my protocol A to Z 100% just like it was your car. The only difference is, instead of you being my customer, I'm just not sending you those pictures and not giving you status updates, okay? I'm doing it for myself. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, we'll break it in. I'll put a few hundred miles on it, maybe a couple thousand miles on it, might do a road trip on it to go see some people that want to see a car like that. And then my plan is to put it on the online auction site, Bring a Trailer. And Bring a Trailer is a great resource for selling Porsche cars. Matter of fact, as we speak right now, there's a 911 on there, has my engine in it. Doesn't happen very often at all. People that buy engines from us keep the car. Just like you. I think if you were going to have me do this work, you would consider that an investment, and I couldn't pry that car out of your hands. That's what happens, okay? Very seldom do we have people sell the cars. Usually there's a dire situation, an illness, economy, something like that drives it. Or sometimes guys just get tired of that particular car. Not everybody's a forever guy like I am. I keep freaking everything, right? They're not that guy. They sell the car. But it happens very infrequently. But my idea is to go on bringatrailer.com and list the car for sale with all the photographs of all the things that we've done and let it sell there for what it's going to be. And honestly, my idea is to put it on there with no reserve. I'm just going to put it on and let it be what it is, because when I bought the car from you, I didn't know what I was going to do with it to begin with. I like talking to you. I like dealing with you. You were local. I said, I'll buy this car. It is what it is. Then the day I got it, that's when I had this idea. I approached Bobby, said, what do you think about doing this as a focus on series? He's like, I think it's great. That's when we decided to do it. And then he's like, well, what are you going to do with the car when it's done? I said, well, I hadn't really thought about that. But, maybe I want to keep it. I don't know. But now I think I'll put it on Bring a Trailer, and it'll go to the next person. Now, and I have to tell you, and I'm telling all you guys at home this too, the fact that I'm doing all that and I'm selling this car to somebody I don't know, that concerns me. Because as I've sold my air-cooled cars, I haven't advertised any of them for sale. It's been somebody I know, it's been a friend of a friend, it's been somebody I can get to know for a while, because there's nothing worse for me than dealing with the wrong guy. So when I sell an engine to somebody, had you gone a little bit further in my process, you would have seen I have this thing called the gauntlet. And I make people expose themselves to me and what they feel, and honestly, if they're entitled or why they think they're entitled or what they're looking for, a list of must-haves, things they gotta have, and a list of can't-stands. I make people fill this out. And it's not that I'm being picky about my work, I'm being picky about my reputation and my life, because as you see here, this is not a job. This is a life that I've had since the age of 13. When I was a Marine working on helicopters during the day and flying at night, in my extra time, I was building engines in my barracks room and selling them at the Pomona swap meet in California. I've always done this. So to me, I don't want to deal with the wrong guy. And I don't have to deal with the wrong guy. So what honestly scares the pants off of me, if I sell this car to somebody on one of those websites, he can be the great guy. He can be, he can be your doppelganger. He can be everything you are, and that would be great. But I have to worry about getting it sold to the wrong guy, especially one that's low mileage, that is assumed to be absolutely perfect and can't even have a bug stain on it, right? So that brings me into where the car is now. The car is currently at North Atlanta Custom Detailing, being paint corrected, not like it needed paint correction, but it is 17 years old, and ceramic coated. That's where the car is right now. That's why you can't see it today. They do a lot of work for me. I said, just take it there and do it in your spare time. I've got time while the motor's apart to let you keep it. So that's what they've done. And I kind of keep something there all the time with them. But that worries me. So there would be nothing better than if it went on there, no reserve, and you were able to buy the car back. I think that would be absolutely 100% full circle.
Well, see, I bought into, when I talked to you, I decided if I was going to redo it, that I was going to do it right. And I probably wouldn't have gotten rid of it then. I'd have kept it.
Yeah.
But then I had to think about, I'm 78 years old, and the wife factor came in. And I decided as much as that probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, people want cars that have our engines in them. I mean, every day, and this is the thing, if you guys are one of the people at home that want to buy an engine or want to buy a car and then have an engine like ours built, if you send me an email saying, hey, I want to buy a car with one of your engines in it, you're going to get a canned response. I get this sometimes 3 times a day. And that canned response, you're going to be able to tell us a canned response, and it's just basically going to say you and everybody else wants a car that has our engine in it. We don't want to increase production. We keep it where it's at. We keep that quality versus the quantity thing there. And people want that. So, I've had guys that want to buy one of these cars with our engine in it. They don't give a damn what color it is. They don't care what the interior color is. They don't care what options it has. They don't care if the tires are bald. They don't care if it has 150,000 miles on it. As long as that engine that was purchased from us is in the car, can be documented, and somebody's taking care of it, that trumps everything. And that makes me feel really, really good because of what we've created, and what we've created not through a bunch of hype and all this modern day marketing where these marketing companies make somebody look like they're better than they are. It's from that organic thing of dealing with people just like you. So you would have been an absolute #1 perfect person that I would have dealt with if you would have done this work. And if you end up with a car back, I would feel extremely good on all points.
No, well, you never know. You just never know, because I mean, you're my kind of guy. And I figured that out over the period of a year in listening and taking what you said to me initially and processing it and comparing it to other options. And then I came back to you, and that's the reason, because that was my decision.
Well, then I could tell that too. Guys like us can read the other guy. My dad taught me how to read somebody in 5 minutes, not judge, but read somebody in 5 minutes. And he passed away in 2009, but he was born in 1930, and he grew up in the Depression. He was selling newspapers the day after Pearl Harbor was bombed. And he told me all those stories, and he raised me like that, and that's why I like all this old stuff. I like this, I like cars that have carburetors and points.
Yeah.
I just do. I mean, the newest thing I drive around is like a 1980s something,
Yeah.
and that's kind of too new. So, Pete, I just want to thank you for coming here into my world during this time of COVID-19, with everybody being afraid of their own shadow and everything else out there. And spending time here to tell us what you think about that car, this engine, what you see apart, what you think about my invention, what you think about what you experienced as the owner of a 996 that never had another failure while you owned it of any kind. I just appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that you've sat here with us for over 2 hours in this world.
Well, I appreciate being invited to be here and to talk to you, and this has been, this is a world I love, and I'm very pleased that the car that I thought so much of is in good hands, and somebody else is going to drive it for a long time.
So of course, we want to invite you to subscribe to our channel, and we want you to click that join button, because what that does, it gives you that exclusive content that is not available to a regular YouTube subscriber. You're only going to get that if you click join to join the RenVision family. So certainly want to thank you for coming into my world and enjoying these videos. There's nothing I like better than showing you a little piece of what I get to see every day.